Braised pork over rice. Taiwan chili, you might call it. A true Taiwanese comfort food. Though its origins can be traced back to the mainland, of course, the dish is now most commonly associated with Taiwanese food stalls, both within and without. The goal of this dish is to take a small but very fatty piece of pork, usually the belly, which was a cheaper cut back in the day, but less so nowadays, and break it down into tiny, flavor-filled bits in a pool of oily soup to serve over rice. At shops throughout Asia, you'll find it mixed with various garnishes and vegetables in a bowl, usually to justify a higher price. But the key word for this dish is modesty. A sloppy and delicious mess of minced pork over a bowl of rice is all this dish is supposed to be. Though I couldn't resist a bit of green onions just for the sake of color. Now for the ingredients. First we have the pork, of course. I have about 2 pounds each of lean pork and chopped pork ribs. Now if you are a thoroughgoing traditionalist, you'd be using pork belly, but I've found that a combination of lean meat plus the fatty section of the ribs, bone and all, make for a pretty good overall flavor and consistency for the dish. Our other fresh ingredient is a few stalks of green onion, most of which we'll cook, and some of which we'll save for a garnish. For our seasonings, we have some soy sauce and Chinese cooking wine. I know that people can be fussy about their soy sauce and cooking wine, so spring for quality if you like, but I'm not quite so picky when a dish is planning on simmering all day and the flavors end up mellowing out anyway. You don't really want to bite into the dish and notice the quality of the soy sauce or the cooking wine anyway. If you do, then you probably use too much. And of course we have our herbal blend, which includes an array of fresh ginger, 2 slices, star anise, just 1 whole one, 2 bay leaves, 2 cloves of garlic, some Chinese cinnamon, regular is fine, some Sichuan peppercorns, and a piece of a dried orange peel. Now this one you might find surprising, but it's actually a very important part of the dish, adding that je ne sais quoi that just lifts the flavor. You can try drying an orange peel in the sun for a day or 2 yourself, though I wouldn't recommend using a fresh peel, as the flavor will be sharp and bitter. A few shavings of orange zest might do the trick though, but I haven't tried it. We also have some sugar. I like to use raw sugar, but white should be fine too if that's all you have. You just might want to use a little bit less. Another surprising ingredient, dried porcini mushrooms. In fact, dried porcini mushrooms come in a Chinese variety that is often used in stews and teas throughout China, as it is a common herbal ingredient that adds a wonderful earthy flavor to dishes. You might even find them more easily at your local Asian supermarket than at your fancy Italian shop. Here I have about 20 grams or so dried, and I'm going to soak them in water for at least half an hour. Now it's time to hand mince our pork. Of course, you could always just buy minced pork from the get-go, but in my experience, after stewing it for so long, the pork loses nearly all of its texture, whereas hand chopping it causes it to retain just a bit more thanks to our natural imprecision. Next we can drain and chop our porcini mushrooms. You'll want to save the water to use throughout the cooking process as the stew dries out, adding in even more earthy flavor. Now it's time to cook. You'll first want to bring a pot of water to a boil and toss in the pork ribs for not even a minute. This will just help to get rid of some of the stronger, less pleasant flavors trapped inside the bones, as well as some of the excess fat. You'll notice the cloudy yuckiness left in the pot. Next, heat a tablespoon or so of neutral cooking oil in a large Dutch oven or heavy bottom saucepan. You don't need much oil here, there's plenty in the pork. And gently saute the porcini mushrooms and green onion until fragrant, before adding in the ribs and the aromatics and turning up the heat. Now, many recipes say to actually put the aromatics in a little sachet to flavor the stew that way. But I find that you get a much more robust flavor if you actually saute the aromatics at a high heat first. In this way, you infuse the oil with their flavors. Then add in the mince and stir constantly over a fairly high heat. Lower the heat and cover for a few minutes so that the pork starts to release some of the liquid inside. Then add in the rest of the liquids. You'll want about half a cup each of soy sauce and cooking wine, as well as a tablespoon of sugar and maybe 1 cup of plain water. We'll be using the porcini water later as needed. Now we have our raw stew with all the ingredients assembled but one time. So we'll want to bring the mixture to a boil right away. And then give everything a final mix before lowering the heat to as low as my oven can go, covering it and leaving it to do its thing at a low simmer. Now, depending on how big of a batch you're making, this process could take anywhere from 3 to 6 hours. This batch took me about 4, but I've let it go longer in the past. Once you complete the initial cooking, in fact, it would be the perfect dish to put in a crock pot for the day. After a few hours have passed and the liquid has mostly evaporated, it's time for a taste test. You want the pork to be falling apart in your mouth, so if it isn't, then it needs more time, and probably more liquid. When the end product's texture is to your liking, try and fish out the large, dried spices, if you put them in, just to make things easier for the folks at the table. When ready, serve over a pile of steamed white rice and garnish with some fresh green onions and enjoy. It's an adventurous dish for most, but the result should be something truly special and comforting.